Good morning and welcome to the September 2024 board meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Regulation Agency, or MHRA as we prefer to call ourselves. My name is Graham Cook and I'm standing in as the interim co-chair for the MHRA board alongside Mandy Calvert and Michael Whitehouse, and my role today is to lead us through today's agenda. I must start by reminding everybody that this is a board meeting held in public and it's not a public meeting. It's also important to explain that the board is responsible for agreeing the strategic direction of the agency, maintaining high standards of corporate governance and scrutinising the performance of the MHRA. But it's also important to clarify that the board does not make regulatory decisions on any medicines or medical devices. This is because regulatory decisions on individual medical products are made by ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care on the recommendation of MHRA officials who are independent civil servants, with the additional independent advice from our external advisory committees such as the Commission on Human Medicines. Now, as far as today's meeting is concerned, I also need to make you aware that we'll be recording the meeting so we can publish the video on our websites and to provide the opportunity for as many people as possible to observe the board and what the board does. On that note, I'm particularly pleased we have more than average number of attendees today, with 100 people registered to observe, 44 members of the public or public representatives, representatives of patient groups and charities, 18 from industry and 15 members of staff. So thank you all and thank you for joining us. And there'll be an opportunity for questions to the board related to the agenda later in the meeting. With introductions in mind, I'd like to go around the room and ask my colleagues on the board to introduce themselves so the audience know who we are. June.
Good morning, I'm June Rain. I'm the CEO at the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency.
I'm Natalie Richards. I'm the head of the Executive Office at the MHRA.
Morning, Raj Long, Non-Executive Director on the board. Thank you.
Morning, Rose Braithwaite, Chief Finance Officer.
Good morning, Mercy Jersingham, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Glenn Wells, Chief Partnerships Officer.
Good morning, Nicola Rose, Interim Executive Director for Science and Research.
Good morning, Paul Goldsmith, Non-Exec Director.
Good morning, Alison Cave, Chief Safety Officer, MHRA.
Good morning, Liz Booth, Chief People Officer.
Good morning, Julian Beach, Interim Executive Director for Healthcare Quality and Access.
Good morning, Mandy Calvert, Interim Co-Chair, Non-Exec Director.
Good morning, Claire Harrison, Chief Digital and Technology Officer.
Good morning, Catherine Glover, Deputy Director for Medicines Regulation and Prescribing at the Department of Health and Social Care.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Bosworth, Director of Communications and Engagement.
Good morning, Carly McGarry, Director of Governance, MHRA.
Thank you, everybody. A couple of sort of things to note. I think this is our last board meeting for Glenn Wells. So, Glenn, thank you for everything you've done for the organisation and for the board, and best of luck with your new ventures in the MRC. So, yeah, thank you. We'll note that properly later. And the other announcement is to say that Dame June has been asked to stay on, as people will know, by the Permanent Secretary for a further 6 months. And the advertisement for the CEO has been made public this week, so that's now in the public domain. So, congratulations, June. Okay, so to our main agenda. So some apologies this morning. Haida Hussain is travelling. I'm afraid Junaid Bajwa has been caught up in travels. Laura Squire is travelling with work. Kathy Harrison and Andrew Evans sent their apologies. I believe we have Alison Strath joining from the Scottish Government, perhaps later. Maybe one of her colleagues will join later. I think that was said. There's no other apologies that I'm aware of. In terms of declarations of interest, are there any changes or updates? I think we have a new one from Junaid Bajwa, who I think has now left Microsoft and joined Flagship Pioneering. And Raj, I think your Gates role has finished. Is that right? It's still down as active on the board.
All right. Sorry. Yes, I'm no longer with Gates.
Sorry, microphone. Yeah. So we'll update that. That's great.
That's correct. I've retired from the Gates Foundation.
Great, thank you. Anything else to update? Otherwise, no. Lovely. We'll go to the minutes of the last meeting. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the last set of minutes? This is from the meeting held in public on the 9th of July, which is now available online but wasn't broadcast live. Are there any comments? There were a couple of actions in there. I think, Alison, there was a piece of work about cross-government working and working perhaps with the medical schools in light of some of the learnings of the infected blood inquiry. I don't know if there's any update on that.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, we continue to work cross-government and also cross-healthcare sector to try and improve reporting for the yellow card scheme. Obviously, there's a lot of complexity and need for interoperability between those systems, and we're continuing to work with them. With regards to the medical school, yes, we are working with the Medical Schools Council to release MHRA and MHRA education series for medical students, and we've done 2 or 3 pilots with medical schools to test the utility and the acceptability and the usefulness of those pilots. And we're hoping also to incorporate some questions on yellow card into exams in the future. So yes, that work's going well, and normally we try and integrate with Patient Safety Week for 4th year medical schools, because that's obviously a good opportunity.
Okay, great. And I don't know, I mean, we can think again about whether it needs to come back to board. We've got it down on the action tracker for January, but if you feel it's appropriate, we can talk about that. And then the other item, I think, is also with your name, which is about milestones for delivery plan for the data strategy. So if there's any update on that.
With Planet, we are hopefully the data strategy will be published very soon, and we're working on the delivery plan, and we look to bring that back to board in a couple of months, I think.
Great. Okay, thank you. Any other comments on the minutes? If not, we'll move on, and I think it's over to you, Eugene, for your report. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Graham. I think we're all aware over the last few weeks there's been quite a breadth of deliverables from the agency, all about streamlined access to medicines and medical devices. And I think with the NHS very much in mind, with Lord Darcy's report last week, it's really helpful to see how important the products that we deliver, innovative, groundbreaking medicines, and also the technology, AI-empowered medical devices, are to actually transforming the NHS. I think the other important highlight is today is World Patient Safety Day. And it's quite good, I think, to have in mind that patient safety is always our first priority. So I'll just give a couple of highlights. It's the usual quite detailed report. But I think highlights in the patient safety domain include the warnings we gave to men on valproate to use contraception in view of data that were carefully analysed that indicated an increased risk of neurodevelopmental disorders in children. And that was a very important piece of further advice, having focused on safety in women up to now. And then we looked at a safety signal with a hip replacement, the CPT STEM hip replacement, where there were signs of failure picked up through the National Joint Registry and integrated with clinical data showed this safety signal. So we were able to advise not to use it for elective surgery. So those are the kinds of things, really important safety advice that enables healthcare to be delivered more safely. I think the report also shows the relevance of the science and research work at the Science Campus to our delivery of important regulatory decisions, and also to open our access to healthcare. And I think a particular highlight is the further release of stem cells from our stem cell bank, 5 lines that came out over July and August. And that's another important option as research manages to show how these can help with important conditions for which there aren't other treatment options. I think in that vein, on access, the authorisation of the first Alzheimer's medicine that has disease-modifying effect, lecanemab, shows that we're keen to be pushing forward in areas where there are limited options. Of course, colleagues will be aware that the health technology assessment decision wasn't in favour of a cost benefit for the NHS, but I think this shows another step along the path with an important pipeline of trials in this space that we're able to look at safe access, particularly in this case with a controlled access programme and a safety study. So that's a really important milestone decision. And of course, day-to-day work continues on eliminating backlogs, particularly an achievement for established medicines has been getting to the magic number of below 200 in September. So we're well on our way with the Return to Green programme of making sure that we are able to be predictable and efficient as well as effective in decision making. So those are a few highlights. It's a usual detailed report, but I think overall our science and research enables better decisions. Access, as ever, is front of mind, but patient safety is the driver throughout. And I'd like to just record thanks to staff. It's been a busy summer and it's an even busier autumn. So thanks to all the staff that make this happen. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, and I think we'll pick up a number of those things in the agenda this morning. So, as always, huge amount of effort from everybody. Thank you. Any particular aspects people would like to ask about? Questions, queries? Paul?
And you may have just answered the question, actually, in terms of the established medicines. So the backlog isn't cleared. What we've achieved is under 200, because that's one of the things which was confusing me. And if that is the case, sort of a bigger picture question on it, really, sort of just trying to look back 5 years ago, what our productivity was in terms of getting through reviews compared to now, and the journey we've been on and where we're going to be by the end of December, and the whether that will carry through into next year.
I guess we'll pick up some of this with the paper bit.
I hope so, yes. I mean, the headline answer is that sustainability is the goal, as we achieved with clinical trials, which is now meeting its statutory timelines and better than, so that we're able to look to improving, the clinical trials ecosystem, moving on from the question of simply, and that's through a regulatory amendment. This is more about sustainability than achieving those milestones, which we're well placed to do. But important for those that use medicines is to know that those decisions are properly made. So there's been no shortcuts taken. It's not a question of rushing through. I hope that the board will look at the sustainability plans clearly sooner than the end of the year for established medicines, innovative medicines, the variations, the changes and the updates, the inspections, and of course scientific advice. So it's a big programme, Return to Green, but the executive team is absolutely focused on sustainable improvement through process changes and IT enabling.
Julian, do you want to comment? Or? And maybe for people in public, the 200, just explain what that is. And
Certainly. So we set ourselves a target of trying to get to an original backlog clearance of less than 200, which we achieved at the beginning of September, which is really great, and all staff have contributed to that clearance. And we're tracking to clear the remaining cases on a very fast basis. The efforts that we're going to are working with industry, but I would ask for industry also to respond with questions and answers promptly, because that enables us to make prompt decisions. So that is where we are chasing, and we are looking to ensure that that is a stable performance going forward. The changes that we have made regarding the one RFI round for established medicines, that seems to be working very well. There has been very strong improvement in applications receipted, which also drives less questions the next time around. So it is a somewhat of a virtuous circle in terms of how we're now approaching things. We are looking to the longer term. One point I would like to raise to the board, just for clarity, there is a percentage approval within statutory timelines that's recorded within the MHRA figures of about 3%. That is affected because we are clearing the backlog performance, and that does not reflect the numbers of licenses going through. In fact, it's pushed down because of the old licenses being approved at this point. We have modelled that, and we do expect that to pick up when the applications are in time, of which we are very strongly going towards. And it's just to be clear that that transition, we are now in that point where we can, in 2025, be planning for long-term sustainability in this function.
Paul?
So if I'm sort of understanding correctly, we've sort of got a degree of external input to try and clear some of this sort of backlog. But from 2025, there will be no external support. And what will be the comparative productivity compared to pre-transformation if we go back 5 years?
So where we are at the moment is that comparative productivity increase has been about fivefold, so that we've improved our efficiency by about fivefold in that assessment area. We have got limited support externally, bringing in additional contingent labour, but we are also recruiting internally MHRA staff and continue to do. We have at the moment further adverts out for medical and quality assessors as we speak. And where we see us is that by 2025, all of the external support will not be required, so that we will be working with our internal processes. The reason for the additional support right now is to clear the increased volumes to make sure that that productivity is demonstrated, but also that we can clear the bolus of work which is above our normal operating levels that we would expect to see, because we're working with a long frame process. So therefore, over any 210-day period, we would expect to see quite considerable volumes of work as work in progress, which we are planning to ensure that we make sure goes through quickly and efficiently.
Thanks. Raj.
Thanks. Thanks, Julian. Firstly, great job getting the numbers down. It's going in the right direction. It's taken us a while to get there. I have a quick question to ask. You mentioned that a message to industry was also to make sure they can come back in a timely fashion in terms of response. And I wondered whether you had any insight why that is. And I'm thinking, I'm wearing an industry hat here in some ways. Is it because they have to go and create new information, generate new data? Because this is established medicine. So I'm thinking it's unlikely, but nevertheless. Or is it something else? And the reason why I'm asking that is the net impact of keeping our established medicines flowing is not about the agency being on numbers, or it's about ensuring we have supply for the NHS. So patients are not in any way impacted by this. So it's in that spirit I'm asking, because it might take, as the expression goes, two to tango here. And if so, if we understand what the issues are, maybe we can also try and address that so that the whole process on both parties then, progresses smoothly. Thank you.
Certainly, and to address that point, partly it's time, so that we are looking really to clear these to aggressive timescales, so that we're looking for support to ensure that they are cleared very quickly. We have been we issued back in April, and we issued back in the summer in July, and we're having a further webinar on around the 17th of October, I think it is 10 a.m. 17th of October, where we'll again be sharing our practices of what we're doing. The main issues that we see, although I really want to commend and thank industry because they are lessening on new applications, not applications which were in the backlog and we need to own and to understand that how do we move those forward, but where we had inadequate or incomplete bioequivalence data, inadequate stability data that didn't demonstrate things in shelf life. So they were, in the main, they were about ensuring that the product did what it says on the tin, to make sure that it is at the end of its shelf life, it still had the same efficacious effect. Because even though things are generic and they are copies, they need to perform to the same standard as each other medicine on the market. And we work very closely with Department of Health Medicine supply team to ensure that supply shortages are monitored and prioritised through the agency, so that we do every 2 weeks we have the medicine supply meeting, of which the MHRA is a core component to, so that we then look at those things coming through. We have seen a significant reduction in type 1B escalations to improve things like batch-specific variations. So those internal numbers cause less disruption because there is less escalation going on to fulfill those short-term requirements. Because, as I think you see in the board papers, we have cleared type 1Bs and we are reducing type 2 variations as well. And that means less escalation is required. So it enables better supply, better product predictability to enable all that infrastructure to work more reliably.
Yes, I think the headline is that we have very strong and close engagement, and that has not only enabled better and prompter responses, but also focus on the kind of changes that we can introduce, understanding in the sector what willingness there is to accept the risks that otherwise the regulator takes on board. And so the group that we have of companies has actually given us quite an insight into changes where they can take responsibility. The type 1s were invented so that industry that's well placed to understand manufacturing issues can actually smoothly adopt those changes themselves, as long as the regulator knows. But there's a whole suite of further ideas that are being worked through at the moment so that we can actually have that much closer tango, if you like, and backing up always by inspection capability. And the only other thing I would add to that is a relentless focus on first off patent, so that we unleash the benefits where relevant without any delay of important medicines, biosimilars in particular. So I think it's an area of very active engagement, and I fully anticipate that we'll be able to do what we did quite a while ago, which is allocate responsibility where it's safe to do so with industry.
Thank you. Any other comments on that?
Yeah, just maybe a thinking as we get through into a more stable environment, really understanding what the transparency of what percentage we approve and what are rejected. And I think that goes for clinical trials as well. So we get that understanding and that open and that visibility, because we can then say, well, this was because we had inadequate this and that. And that would be very valuable information, I think, back into the sector as well. But I don't know, I don't have a feel for how much we approve and how much we don't approve.
All the trends in that, I guess. Yeah. June.
Certainly, I'm more than happy to look at how we can share that, and we can include a slide in that in the webinar on the 17th of October. But I think that, just to give an indication, that the numbers of applications where we have questions, we are putting approximately 35 to 40 medicines to CHM. We are making individual decisions outside of CHM process to make sure that we have those rapid numbers processed, and we can provide that for the grounds. But the grounds are pretty analogous to what I've mentioned, but we can absolutely share that.
I can just add, it's a fundamental parameter of a new and much more decisive system, rather than, if you like, building success in. So we would have had a very low refusal rate, maybe even as low as perhaps 3 to 5%. Industry has accepted that for this period where we're getting to a very efficient and sustainable working, that it will, I think for quite good reasons, be a higher turn down rate. And Julian, I think if I can ask you, be as much as 10%. But this is to, if you like, learn in the system and to feed back the points that have come out of that, whether it is bioequivalence, stability, or, the ability to manufacture reproducibly batch to batch. So a real relentless focus on those 3 tests, because as we know, with a new generic medicine, our big question is, does it work? And that's the, if you like, laser focus at the moment.
Thanks, June.
Just going to say, I think, June, you were being very kind. I think I think it was much lower than 1% what we had been previously refusing. And I think it's really testament to everybody, industry as well, because I know it is causing pain in having refusals and having those decisions. So I just wanted to say and put on record again to say thank you to industry for working with us to enable this to happen, because it does take a lot of effort from both industry and ourselves to make these things happen.
Thanks. Any other aspects people would like to ask about? Mercy.
Just a comment, really. Just to note about the poliovirus research and the impact it's having on world health as well, especially in Gaza. I know we've done a lot of research on the poliovirus, and we're one of the WHO centres, so just to call that out, really.
I'm sure Nicola will want to. I think it's a major contribution, and the ability to work speedily when there's a local threatened outbreak is testament to the focus. It's not just research for research's sake. It's making sure that, particularly with the NOPV2, that the right vaccine is able to be given. I'm sure Nicola would like to say more in tribute to the team that have done it.
Yes, very much so, and thank you to them. Thank you for picking that up. I think a lot of the work as well is focused on understanding how we can build capacity elsewhere so that we can transfer our particular methodologies, our harmonised processes, so this can be done rapidly and effectively, sort of on the ground and in the field. Thank you.
Great, thanks. One thing I just wanted to pick up for Alison was the yellow card reporting. I thought, I mean, this is something that we've visited a lot, and this looks like positive steps forward. I'm just interested because the awareness of yellow card, it seems to be something that we can all do more on in all of our environments, be it with the public, but particularly with professionals, pharmacists and doctors. So this work with EMIS seemed promising, and I just wondered what that's going to lead to and when, and whether other healthcare, EHR providers are engaged as well.
Yes, this arose out of our stats actually, which clearly showed that despite EMIS being having a 56% share of GP practices, they had substantially lower, of the order of almost 9-fold, 8-fold lower reporting than System 1, which is another GP practice. So we've been working with EMIS over the last year to understand that, and they have actually improved quite substantially their EHR system. So they've increased the visibility of the yellow card reporting button, if you like, in their toolbar. So now it's much more visible. They've also been doing streamlining of workflows to report, so less clicks to get to a report, as well as a new right click, for example, on a medication to complete a report. And they're also looking at a suite of new e-learning tools and guidance to support GPs in reporting. And then in the future, they're also considering maybe where you can have a trigger for report. For example, if someone stops a medication and switches a medication, to understand if that was a result of an adverse drug reaction or not. And potentially point of care messaging, for example, if there's a specific risk minimization measure. So, an example would be a pregnancy prevention plan. So a lot of work with EMIS to try and increase that reporting, and we'll be looking to see what impact that has through our numbers.
So, and when would you think you might?
That's already available. They're
Okay.
already rolling that out. So the first,
so you might see an effect quite soon.
Yeah,
That'd be interesting.
the visibility of the button, because it was quite hidden before.
Yeah.
So just small things that actually can make quite a big difference in just seeing it as you're prescribing.
And I mean, I'm mindful of secondary care as well, and I'll try and avoid acronyms again. So when we talk about electronic healthcare records, there are obviously different systems often in hospitals. Is that something that's also in progress, or?
Yes, we're also working with the hospital systems. It's a bit more complex, and there's quite a lot of legacy architecture in some of the hospital systems. So we're working with some of the main providers to understand how we can facilitate reporting as well from secondary care.
Sounds very positive.
I think it might be a good opportunity when there's some availability on our agenda to have a general update, actually. It's the 60th anniversary year. How is this scheme evolving for the future in the ways that Alison has described, so that it becomes even more embedded, particularly with the earlier comment about medical schools, pharmacy schools and others, that it's actually seen as part of a health professional's role rather than an extra job that you do sometimes. So I do think we should have a board consideration of the various aspects of how the scheme is relevant today and for all healthcare products, not just medicines.
I think that. Sorry,
Very
Alison.
happy to do that. In fact, I gave a talk yesterday at the Patient Safety Congress on just that topic. So, not looking back, but looking forward, and what are the strategies to improve reporting through our yellow card scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds like a great idea, and I think that externally, often what I hear is two things coupled together, which is very positive things about yellow card, but then also still how the awareness of it is still relatively low, and we need to keep working on that, I think. Any other questions people have, anything related to this? If not, then perhaps thank you, June.
Thanks.
And we'll move on to Rose and a financial and people performance update. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. So we finished July, our fourth month of the financial year, with a small year-to-date resource surplus of 1.8 million. But our forecast is still showing a projected £2.5 million overspend. This suggests that there's still a bit of optimism bias in how we're going to spend our budget during the year. So at the end of September, which is the half-year point, we will take another deep dive forecasting process to review the proposed spend for the second half of the year, and at that point we can consider how we're doing. But I think that 1.8 is showing that actually probably over-programming for the year was a good idea. So happy to take any questions on the fuller paper.
Thanks. Any questions or comments for Rose? Amanda?
It was just a question really about Reg Connect and the process for the capital spend to address that, given where we are at the moment. And I just wondered what our thoughts were financially.
So do you want to just sort of explain a bit more?
Well, Reg Connect is not now it's sort of in abeyance because it can't meet and it's going to be delayed, and it couldn't deliver within the original budget and timescale. So that's going to affect our financial planning, both this year and next year. And I just wanted to understand what the impact would be and what we would see this year and what we would see in subsequent years.
Okay, so yes, the budget for Reg Connect was based on the business case and with the original estimates from Accenture. Those have turned out not to be quite correct, and so we have had to replan the project for this year so that we stay within our capital funding. We cannot exceed our capital funding because this is provided by the department and we have no other source of capital funding. As part of the spending review, we have asked for additional capital funding next year so that we can put more money into Regulatory Connect. So we won't know the outcome of that, obviously, until later in the year. But we have requested additional capital to deal with the increased costs in delivering that project.
Is that?
I'm sure we'll perhaps come back to that next week.
Okay. Oh, there's a signal. Oh, okay.
Chair, if I can just say, I don't think it's in abeyance. I think there's a modified rollout at the moment, absolutely focused on the product licensing advantages and opportunities as we move back to sustainable functioning. That doesn't detract from the point you've articulated so well, that we need to rethink the funding. But actually, it's the modified and focused rollout that is happening at the moment. And I think it is something that the executive is paying a lot of attention to understand where the influence can be. We've always traditionally had a Regulatory Connect type of system that is very, very bespoke. And I think it's that shift towards, and I'm sure Claire might comment on that, something that can actually be really streamlined and simplified, rather than every single issue that a regulator might face has its own bespoke programme. Several hundred, I believe, in the past.
Claire, do you want to comment? Or? Okay. Is that okay, man? Yeah.
Yeah. No. Thanks for clarifying.
So, I'm not an accountant, but at some point you can explain to me about how the running hot works. But it seems to be that is being a positive thing that's going to help, hopefully, land where we want to land.
Yes, I think the main thing about it is, as in many organisations, there's a optimism about how we spend our money, how long it takes to procure new contracts and to actually spend the money. So it's very much a case of this year we've decided to build that into our budget and actually budget for more than the funding we have in order to contradict that optimism bias. And I think by the fourth month of the year, we're showing signs that that was the correct thing to do. The only trouble is we've still got optimism bias, that optimism in our forecast, which we just need to, at the half-year point, talk to budget holders across the organisation and do a reality check, let's say, on how optimistic they are on spending their budgets, where their contracts are in terms of fulfilment, to get that forecast back in line with what the reality is likely to be.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Michael. Michael, I'm afraid, with the move of the meeting, obviously you've just arrived. Do you want to just introduce yourself? You've come at the perfect moment at the end of the financial report, so I don't know if you had any comments you wanted to ask.
Good morning. My name is Michael Whitehouse. I'm non-executive director. Thank you.
Okay. Was there anything on the finances that you wanted to flag up?
Oh, we're on finances.
Given that this is your expertise.
No, I think Rose's report is very clear. I think you reference in there, and I think we'll come on to it shortly, Regulatory Connect, which is
we've just touched on that. So
a real risk going forward. But that would be my only point at this point in time. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. So I think people is on your brief as well. I don't know if you want to make any comment on.
Well, I don't know if Liz wants to come in on the people element of the finance report.
Yes, I'd say that our turnover is moved up a fraction of a percentage point. We're not quite in the range that we really belong in. We're around about 7%, and we really need to belong in the 8 to 10% range. So turnover is slightly lower than we might like as an organisation, but of minor note, really.
Yeah, but it generally looks like a relatively healthy report there, and things are sort of getting back to where we want them to be in terms of headcounts, as far as I can tell.
We're getting there. We're certainly adding more people than we are losing.
Yeah.
That's always a good thing at this point.
Great. Any questions on the Mercy?
Just to note again, this non-clinical counselling service for staff that started in May, did we not have an equivalent support service before? Just slightly confused.
Yes, we do. We have, like most organisations, an employee assistance programme that offers up to 6 sessions of counselling to colleagues following triage. We noticed, however, that our colleagues, we get reasonable use of it, normal use of it, but we noticed that when our colleagues were under particular pressure, and it's true that we are putting people under a great deal of pressure to deal with backlogs, managers were reporting that they were worried about people but not quite sure what to do. The non-clinical service, which is probably a bit of a misnomer because our counsellor is a fully accredited BACP counsellor, but the purpose of that service is really when people are not sure whether they need some help, they can go and see that person or talk to that person online, and he may refer them to the EAP or may just do a bit of work with them. We also do some group work with colleagues. So if colleagues are feeling under particular stress, we might run a group session for colleagues. So it's really a kind of backstop service as I see it, and one that's about I call it the counselling service for people who are not sure whether they might need counselling. A more open service than going through the fairly cumbersome triage process that you get in a normal EAP.
Okay, thank you. Could I also ask about the stress survey, which is live at the moment? It kind of strikes me as well. This is obviously going to give you a snapshot about how people are at the moment, but there must be sort of ups and downs during the year and different pressures and things. Is there a way of tracking that, or? Yes,
we've adopted an always open stress survey. Which has some issues, of course, because people can multiply report. So there's a downside and an upside to that. But we look at the data every quarter. We've only had one quarter so far, with the hope of being able to track the change. We have had good engagement from colleagues. I would be foolish to say I'm not concerned. I am concerned about the impact the pressure we're putting on people is having, but being able to understand what people are feeling and refer to our services, such as we run what's commonly known as a mental health first aider scheme. We don't call it that, but we have a number of ways that allow people to report and get help and talk about the stress levels they're experiencing. So it's quarterly reported, but the survey is always open, so people can always report how they're feeling, and we look at it really regularly.
Great, thank you.
Did you want
to? Yes, and just building on that really helpful update from Liz, it's something the executive team is really concerned about at the moment, knowing the pressure colleagues are under, and maybe even as a litmus of that, we have staff networks, some of which have been a bit in abeyance because of the pressures otherwise. So we've got a list of things that need to be doing, and I think it's something that we want to assure the board that we're keeping under very close review. You've probably come across our leader on the diversity team side, who's really effective in bringing things to the surface. So our all-staff meeting had a focus on it, and our one agency leadership group too. So I'm glad it's been highlighted today, because it is something that we are paying very close attention to.
And sorry if I missed it, but the uptake of those services, I mean, are we tracking how often they're being used, and what can we say about how effective they are?
In terms of the non-clinical counselling service, at the moment, I am concerned that we are not providing enough of it. The take-up has been beyond expectation. We're also...
So it's been beyond expectation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, we're fortunate that although our counsellor is obviously fully BACP qualified and subject to their code of conduct, he is able to give us some thematic information about what people are discussing that obviously doesn't breach any confidentiality. So with that in mind, we may need to extend that pre-clinical counselling service. It's one of the things we're looking at.
Okay, great. Mercy, is that? Yeah. I mean, we won't go through all these. Are there any other comments on any of these sections that people want to make, any of the different areas? If not, thank you, Rose. That's very clear. And I think you still have the floor. So operational performance, I guess you might want to bring other people in as well. But
Yes, thank you, Graham. So just a quick summary. This report shows the agency's performance against its KPIs and metrics and progress on the agency's business plan during the first quarter of the financial year. Given that we're now in September, we've also added a few more details where relevant on some of the KPIs. Against the business plan, around 70% of our objectives are on track. We've got 3 that are expected to be late and several which are at risk, so we're monitoring and putting extra measures in place to make sure they return back to green. Of our 8 KPIs, 4 are still being missed, but as June said earlier, backlogs have reduced significantly, so these will start getting on track, we intend, kind of by towards the end of this year. So happy to take questions or to distribute them between my colleagues who know more than me on some of these performance indicators.
I'll let you field slightly. I mean, any particular issues people want to pick up? We've got some paper later on recognition, and we've touched on some of these things already, but there's an opportunity to come back. Questions from anybody? I mean, I suppose just one comment. Sorry, just one comment. I think just mindful of the last conversation and mindful of the work that's gone in. I think there's clearly the evidence of a huge amount of work from people across the organisation. So I think that's a very positive thing. Paul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just on the complaints side, because it said there'd been a reduction, but when I'm looking at the figures, it'd been an increase. But I mean, there's a broader question just in terms of the nature of the complaints, and if that gives us a feel for a barometer of our overall customer satisfaction.
Just point to where you're looking at.
I think it's on the last. Where is it? Slide 40.
Oh, I need to get the slides. Okay. Rachel, do you want to comment at all?
Yeah, certainly. So we do regular complaints analysis, as you would expect, and what we find is the nature of complaints varies over time. So when we had significant backlogs in established medicines, we received a number of complaints from industry about those. We're seeing those dropping now in line with the improvements in performance. So it varies according to what is happening in the organisation and performance areas, but very happy to bring back a more detailed review if that would be helpful.
Well, just from a sort of board perspective, are there things in there, any themes that we should know about as sort of early indicators?
Yeah, absolutely. And we take an overview of patient and public questions to our public health committee at executive level every month. And so if there are particular areas where we're receiving a number of comments or complaints, we then look at whether there are actions we need to take to address those.
Rose?
I think we can pick up in the next report. I think that's probably a good idea to start drawing in the insight a little bit more on the themes that we're getting.
Yeah, we can
start
certainly
building
do that.
into the report. That's a really
We'll
good
add that in
idea.
from the next quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly we're certainly in a better place being able to look at the performance across a whole range of areas than I think we were some time ago. So I think, again, thank you for the effort that goes into doing this. It is helpful. Inevitably, we tend to pick up on the red things and ignore the green things, but hopefully there'll be fewer of those. There was a small thing, I can't find the slide now, but I'm just curious, I couldn't understand. There was about new active substance approvals seemed to be at 0 across the piece, and I couldn't quite understand that. Does that reflect some trend that is worth being aware of? I assume that means there are no applications. I'll see if I can find the slide where it was on. It was on slide 18. It just seems to be a very low volume, and maybe that's normal. I just don't know. Julian, I don't know if there's any insight. Maybe we could pick it up. I mean, if I look at the new active substances approved, if I understand it correctly, it just seems like very low numbers. Does that reflect just normal business, or is that?
It is normal business, but it's also it was affected for a period of time.
Just microphone, sorry.
Sorry. It is normal business, but it is somewhat affected because there have been some very substantive procedures going through, which have required pretty extensive consultation. So those have delayed where their normal timelines would have been issued. And then there were some reprioritisation to enable clearance of the clinical trials activity. That has had some effect as well. But that is being remediated now, so that there are more numbers coming through. So the figures that you see in July, August, September, October are consequently higher because of now clearing the applications which will come through.
Okay. Any other comment on that? Let me just look at my notes as well. No, I think okay.
While you're doing that, I think there's also the importance of factoring in the international recognition work, and I think it might be useful to have an overview together rather than taking them separately, because it will help our understanding of that shift, which means the need to plan long term. So there's 2 slides in fact that are useful in that regard, and we'll come on to the international recognition and the balance soon. But it has a strong relevance not just to our delivery for public health and for the NHS, but also for planning for the kind of expertise that we need for the future.
Raj.
I was thinking along the same lines too, June. I think where that's important, I think, for us to see is the whole international reliance is a relatively new area for us in the context of the last 4 or 5 years. And therefore, it'll be good to see how many of those, what is the ratio of NCEs, new chemical entities coming in that go through that process, and how many actually now come also directly in that. It'll be a good way to see for future planning and resourcing what that ratio is.
So we might just hold that thought, because I think we're about to come to the paper.
Yep.
I think just hold the thought while we come to the paper in a moment. Unless, did you want to make a comment, June, or we just...
No. That's good.
Michael?
Just one question, and it's just clarification. It's a genuine open question. But on page 34, where you've got the additional operational metrics relating to patient safety monitoring, it refers to June being lower than previous months, and we're switching to new systems and better ways. Just assurance from Alison, you're happy with where that is now in terms of that we are getting the right level of information to alert patients where issues are arising?
Yes, we originally went for just recently we did a go live on a new Safety Connect module, and that led to some technical issues with reports appearing in the next month instead of the previous month. But just for the reassurance of board, we did a full impact assessment on this. Only 2 were relevant signals, and neither of those reports changed our benefit risk assessment. So we are continuously monitoring that to ensure that we don't miss any signals.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear.
Great. Any other questions? There's a lot of data there, but if there's anyone wants to pick up. Yeah, Andy.
Just a little bit on health and safety in terms of, I note that a lot of our cost and risk assessments are behind our target.
Can you just point to the slide so that we know where?
Slide 32 or 73 in the big pack.
Okay.
And given the actions that we're taking to meet the HSE enforcement notice, a lot of those were around our processes and how we have those processes in place and people are trained. How is this feeding into that? And is this symptomatic of, under-resourcing, or is it something that is going to be picked up as we respond to the HSE?
Yep.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. We've been looking at this because we've done an awful lot of work recently, as you're aware, certain areas of the business to look at our risk assessments, make sure that we have better understanding of the ones that will need updating, might need complete review. We are also looking at our system to see how they might be reported, because we are a little bit concerned about these levels when we have done all of that work. So also digging into our safety software to see whether there's any particular reason that we may have missed some that might need archiving, for example, that are no longer needed. So we're doing a bit of a review of that, and hopefully that will give us a little bit more information, and maybe we can pick that up in a future conversation as well.
Okay, that's good that you're looking at that root cause.
Thank you.
So that's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Manny. Michael?
Genuine interest. I'm really fascinated by the additional information on CPRD and where there is coverage.
Again, Michael, sorry, just for us, can you just tell us where you're looking at?
Yes, sorry, page 37. And I've just been a bit there isn't a north-south divide here, or north-west-east divide, because there seems to be quite a lot of take-up or coverage in the southern part of England, but less so in the northeast and Scotland. I just wondered. I mean, is this just a fluke of why is
so?
that?
I guess the question, if may you be so bold as to rephrase, is about representativeness and I guess particularly in terms of geography, but also socioeconomic groupings and so forth. Whether this map is reflecting that.
So just for reassurance, CPRD is fully representative of the UK population, but I can see the figures that you're talking about. We ensure that we have 10% coverage in each of the regions, but some of the East Anglia, the East is due to the GP system, and we're currently trying to bring on new systems and new software systems which allow us to interact with them. Scotland has recently moved to Vision, so we're working with them to bring on more practices. So that's kind of often the complication is the GP system that we're engaged with. But we do work to make sure that we have a 10% coverage in each of the regions, and we have a representativeness sort of metric for the CPRD data.
Without wanting to get into all the detail, then, what are those key things that you measure for representativeness?
I'd have to look, I'd have to bring that back to board, but it's all of the normal socio-economic status and the geographical regions, ethnicity, ancestry, all of the...
Yeah, I just wonder whether rural population is part of it, because obviously that's an area of some focus.
Yes, well, as you can see here, we do it by region.
Yeah.
So to ensure that we have coverage in each of the regions, and 10% is our minimum level that we want in each of the regions. So I think we probably largely do cover sort of urban, where you can see obviously the predominance in London and sort of major cities, but even in the more rural areas, a bigger area, but we still have the 10% coverage that we're seeking.
And correct me if I've misremembered, but it looks like the overall coverage has come up since we've seen data over the last couple of years. Is that right? I'm looking at a headline figure of just over 30%. My memory was
dramatically over recent years. I think 10 years ago it was down at sort of 4 or 5%. So there is a sort of a limit to what is achievable in terms of the cost of bringing the data in, the statistical analysis that we'd need to do, and the work we need to do on the data, but also the need for it for most of our use cases. You know, what is the statistical power we need? And generally, 30 to 40% is probably what we would be aiming at to ensure that for every use case we have sufficient statistical power.
So, I mean, do you have a sort of soft target internally as to where you want to get to, or is it?
I think we've discussed internally at 40% would be sort of a sweet spot in terms of cost of the data, and additional coverage in some of the areas that you can see there, maybe in the East Anglia region, where when we can bring on those GP providers, that will help substantially in those areas.
Okay, thanks. Is that okay, Michael?
No, I have to say it's very helpful having this data presented in this way. It gives additional assurance, so thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Rose. It's a lot of data, a lot of comprehensive work, so very useful. I think it's an opportunity for people to dig into specific areas. Thanks. Let's move on. As we said, we'd already trailed it in advance, Julian, but we'll talk about the international recognition procedures and where we are. So thank you for the paper.
I'll shoot myself with it. Sorry. So as we go through the international recognition, you can see that the process has been to, through the year, to really drive effective delivery of the recognition, establishing guidance updates, establishing a clear requirement, so that as we go through the exec summary, we have enabled that process to be reliable, so that we are evolving and making sure that it is a effective pathway as we're clearing the other backlog in other areas of the licensing performance. We continue to make sure that we are working to deliver the license decisions. We're working very closely with our other healthcare partners, for example, NICE, to ensure that decisions and planning for those products coming through is working through, and that continues to be an area of focus. We have completed a first internal audit, which has been conducted within HQ&A, to ensure that we understand how we can improve our delivery, how we can improve the questions that we ask as we need to. That has been shared, and we will continue to share those. Insufficient documentation is one common cause, so that we do have a number of questions where, as we go through the paper, documentation and evidence of an original reference regulator's decision, that continues to be an area where we need to focus on, particularly with filings from other regulators, for example, FDA, or other regulators where evidence is needed to support decisions or assessments that are being made. As we go through, you can see that the timescales that we are delivering at the moment on Route A are median days of 48 days for a decision against the timeline of 60. Route B, we're looking at slightly longer, 56 days as a median, but that is working through for applications to come where there may be some longer CHM requirements, so I do expect that to grow and get longer, so that as we can and will make a decision, we are making those decisions as quickly as we can do. So as you go through, you can see there is obviously training, putting things into procedures that has been really clear in terms of making sure that we have regular triage, making sure that the practices about what we assess and how we do those assessments are very clearly structured. We have seen Route B applications where there is significant discussion required with industry to ensure that we have all of the required evidence to get through the validation stage, and it's one of those aspects which we continue to work with industry on in terms of to provide that evidence. As we go through, we are looking at ensuring that it is one of a number of pathways enabled to companies so that we are clear whether it's coming through a national route or whether it's going to be coming through the IRP route. So to that end, that split of applications and resource required, that is obviously critical. So to answer some of the questions that were posed earlier, we do see differences between novel active substances and generic medicines. So those are really looking at what industry see. There is very much a requirement to have a UK national licence. And what we shouldn't forget is that an international recognition is an extended pathway for new medicines to get on the market, in that it needs to have 2 regulator approvals rather than 1 as it goes through a national route. So you need the original reference regulator decision, and then you need a decision from the MHRA. So that drives that balance of strategic importance regarding the positioning. We are then looking at how do we have our strategic aim very clear, looking at patients getting early and sustainable access to medicines, ensuring the agency has capability to deliver both national assessments and then using the IRP to support that and supplement that in particular areas and defining what those focus areas should be. So there is a lot of work in terms of establishing what that is, so that at this point in time, generic medicines we see as being approximately 70% national, 30% through the IRP route. That's backed up with industry surveys for companies that are reporting those figures to us. And we see, based on evidence of previous reliance schemes, that a 50-50 mix for new active substances could be something that we should be aiming for, and we should be using the IRP in balance with the other aspects to provide that targeted approach to where we want national applications to be. And I think we cannot take IRP in isolation. It's one of the complementary routes of application to the agency. We do see at this point the assessment requirements and the documentatory evidence to prove what has been already assessed by other regulators. That continues to be an area of real focus and work, and we are looking to improve our assessment of that. So just summarising the paper, but I'm happy to take any questions.
No, thank you. And I mean, I found it a very helpful paper. Actually, it had a good level of detail in it. So thank you for the work on that. Questions, Raj? I don't know if you want to pick up the question you had earlier, and then we can.
Thank you. I think a really good paper, Julian, for our initial insight into this whole process. So, am I correct in understanding you say it was roughly about a 70-30% split, 70% for national, for the generics? Is that correct? Did I hear that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And is that largely because it's a time factor for industry? They can get their generics approved faster if they go through nationally? What would be the...
I think there are a number of drivers. The requirement for the reference, so the principle within the UK is that we will have all generic medicines performing equivalently. So there's brand interchangeability between different manufacturers, and that relates to the bioequivalence of each product. And because of that, the requirement to have a UK reference product does drive some of that. We have the requirements for UK comparative products, which can be used also. So there are guidances which are in place to determine that. And pulling an application from another jurisdiction, it does have differences to the requirements that we will recognise. And particularly for our newer reference regulators, there are some changes or some supplementary activities that we need to do for patient labelling, particularly within the UK in SMPC criteria. And so those things and the differences can be more marked, but that means as we get more and more clear on their guidance, we can be more and more enabling those things to be very clear up front and be pulled through. But I think there is a value for a UK licence, which companies are clearly indicating to us in terms of that management, the rapid action from UK. But it's an area where if we can use for supply resilience, bring in other medicines from the same or similar manufacturers on a generic medicines type, that can enable more supply routes into the agency or into the country.
So I'm just understanding, so the different, the BE requirement, the labelling requirements, bringing it all together in the same place, still the impact is time because it's taking them longer as opposed if they go, right?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah, so, okay. So,
Could just come in there from the feedback from the BGMA that also a lot of the generics companies are UK based, so they're not, and they, so their business case is something around that. So there's some about that driving that as well. It's not solely dependent on our timeline. There's other factors.
Yeah. So the impact is still time. For a company, it's time is a huge factor. You know.
And one other part that I did pull out in the paper, hopefully clearly, was that we do have a bit of a unique position in terms of we are utilised as a reference regulator as much as we are referencing other regulators. So therefore our assessment reports and our decisions are utilised. So there is a benefit to come to the UK in terms of having use it in other locations. And so as other regulators are, that is happening, but we also see that happening for new actives as well, so that we are requested for assessment reports to enable applications to be progressed in other jurisdictions.
Yeah. So I guess it goes back to company strategies. That's what I'm looking at here to see how is this driving us in terms of our business need. So if I'm looking at a company strategy for generics, it's quicker to come here because a lot of them, to Mandy's point, because we are also the reference for other countries. That's what I'm hearing, right?
That is definitely one aspect. Yeah. So there are a number, but it's
okay.
For it to happen.
So it's still quicker. I think I'll come back to the time thing to see how we can do it. But then when you compare that to NCEs, new therapies coming in, it's slightly reversed. It's 50-50, you said, right?
From the numbers of applications that we see, correct. So we see it slightly because there are first filings in other jurisdictions where we can reference them, and if there are a number of reports looking at timeliness for specific medicines, but if they are not actually submitted for us to actually do that review, then and just on a purely time-based basis, we will never be first.
Yeah.
But so, it's looking at how do we encourage that to get early access for UK patients.
So I guess not for discussion, but something I think worth thinking through to say if we can understand their strategies a little bit more, we can then focus on where it matters as opposed to trying to look at both together. So if NCEs are 50-50, I mean, broadly speaking, that can change, right? And it's very much driven by where they file first, right? So our approach then can be conducive in terms of where we put our resources and how we tackle that. However, the former is slightly different. We might be the first reference country for that in terms of it. So again, our approach might need to be different because we need to align ourselves a little bit also, I think, on how industry works.
That's correct.
In that way. So something for further discussion, I think. Now it's early stages. Yeah. But it'd be good, I think, Chair, at some point to bring this back to board so that we know where to focus and how to focus.
Glenn, did you want to comment before Julian comes back?
Yeah, just really quickly. As it happens, yesterday afternoon we signed off the report that we commissioned from Wood Newton on international recognition. The reason it hasn't come out earlier is we went back and asked them to mine their data a bit more.
Sorry, I missed this. So the report from
Wood Newton, they're an organisation we used to do research on behalf of the agency. Some of it needs to be done for the executive, but we'll answer some of those questions. There's a lot of information there about the behaviour of regulators in the industry around the globe, and there are a lot of information in there about themes of why people choose to do what they do, and indeed why we might want to choose to stick at 50 or more for national routes. It's not because of things that are not done around the world. But we'll get that report around to EXCO. It's just that yesterday we funded a sign off for it, and it will come out.
No, it's fine. It sounds like it might be helpful for board to see it as well if people are interested. Yeah. Julian, sorry, you were going to come back.
Yeah, and I suppose it's more that with the regulator position, We've then got to be working with companies to understand what their pipeline is, and that's very much a strong activity. So again, another webinar that we are doing on the 26th of September, which was moved from earlier in the year, is really to pull that together. So one of the activities that we're very strongly working with NICE on is around horizon scanning, to understand that filing and that route to market, so that we can then determine how do we resource ourselves. Is it likely to come by X or Y route? And then we can then be clear with that company up front. So the timeframes we're looking to establish are in the 3 to 5 year horizon, not shorter than that, because that gives us more time to be able to react. And when you pull all the company information together, you reduce the risk, because some things will move forward, some things will move back, but it gives us a more stable planning tool and evolving of what has been previously done to bring that together. And that is really the learning that we have to understand which route we can suggest to a company as well.
There are a couple of small things I wanted to pick up. Well, one small, one bigger. I mean, if I understood it, there's quite a high proportion of applications failing validation stage. And is this something that we can support in other ways? Or have we looked enough at what we're asking for to check that we really need it all? Because it does feel quite a high level, I think, if I've understood it correctly.
And that's what we've alluded to in the paper, so that we are looking at working on that now to see, is there other ways that we can pull the information that may not be able to be supplied to us, so that how can we...
Do we have checklists and things? I mean,
we do. So there is an eligibility checker on the website which companies can use.
But they sometimes choose not to.
Well, I think people are using it, but I think it's also some information may not be so readily available or in a time-bounded fashion, so that it's really looking at making sure that what are we asking, how do we prove those questions if the evidence from a reference regulator is not there.
But there may be some work to do, you're saying, to try and just review what we're asking for and whether that's appropriate.
Exactly, and then it's really to understand how can we publish that guidance, correct.
Okay. The other thing I just wanted to pick up, and others may have comments, if I've just lost my note, but I think it's 2.4 if I remember. You talk about areas of focus, 4.2. You talk about areas of focus. So you say focus of national activities can centre around disease areas which are agreed and could be proposed to be cancer, ATMP, so advanced therapeutic products, respiratory, cardiovascular and renal. So just to understand a little bit about how we get to an agreed, well, first of all, why we need this, which I think is useful to rehearse, but also how we get to what we want these priorities to be across the piece, both across the agency and across the broader life science system. So interested in your thinking on that. Glenn may want to comment as well.
Yeah, I think this is really a partnership with the ecosystem review in terms of understanding what that is. The reason for it is we obviously have a lot of medicines coming through to us, and how to be fair and consistent to companies in the approach that we take, and so that we are treating all medicines from all companies the same way, so that if there's a route for an area that the agency really wishes to be specialising in, then we can be prioritising those applications. Or if there's a particular area of public health where there is unmet need that we need to be resolving, that we can evolve those guidance, that practice. The IRP route is a resource sharing activity. So if we're utilising the review from another regulator, that means we don't have to put so much resource into it. So it's then trying to have that prioritisation and where do we would wish to do that. So that it's not the right phrase, but it's the one I'm coming to mind, is we can't boil the ocean, but we should really focus on really those key aspects of what do we see as critical for the UK infrastructure. And that's where working with partnerships with DH, with NICE and others to really look and evolve that thinking. So I don't know, Glenn.
Well, Glenn and Nicola may both want to comment, but Glenn.
Yeah, fun enough, I talked to Catherine about this yesterday. The issue of prioritisation by the agency comes up a lot, and more so in the last few weeks, interestingly. On one hand, it's kind of tricky for us. The law's quite clear. When we receive something, we review it within timelines and process it within those legal frameworks. On the other hand, to make ourselves attractive and use all the tools that are at our disposal, we might want to look at where we do in fact prioritise resource. And I think that's a conversation with the system and all of our partners across the UK, which we do have, and that's where some of this push is coming from. And what can the agency do? But also with ministers who would need to be clear about what we're doing with what application and why, so that we can work within the confines of the law.
And can you just say a bit more about how within the system we're going to get to an answer that we're happy with as a...
So it's not that we can do alone. The work we do with the entire of the UK is part of the work Julian does with individual parts of the system, and Alison and others around the table. We need to do the one thing which is very hard, which is to get the UK to agree on what the top 3 to 5 things are. And that has to be a UK decision because regulation is UK-wide. And so our resources is deployed on their behalf. So it's not so straightforward for us to say, these are the 5 exciting things, let's do that. Because if we license a load of things that we think are exciting, but the system doesn't want, then we're in a bit of a difficult situation. So I haven't got a quick answer.
I know it's not an easy question, and it's one that needs a bit more thought, but I guess there's a question here for how much we push that agenda and how much we respond to it and how we do that.
I would say personally, in my view, based on recent reviews and reports that have come out in public then, and the general tone of government, which is to work more together, be collaborative, I think we need to push the conversation quite hard in the coming weeks.
I'm seeing some nods around that. I don't know how to do that. Sorry, June.
Well, I also think that we take that end-to-end view and we know where the trials are. We want to attract first in human, etc. And it's, if you like, counterposed compared with once you've got a product in recognition, it will stay in recognition and a company in recognition will continue. So that's a really important aspect of this, that the risk management, etc., further enhancement of the product, new populations will be in another hand. We will be secondary. So it's really important, as you say, Graham, that we push this for where we know we're attracting trials, we're supporting developers, the research is, if you like, embedded, and our patients in the NHS are actually getting the benefit from the earliest stage. So I think it's a stand back now and look at that you were pointing to Nicola as well, that whole trajectory. So if you take dementia, we're doing the work on the biomarkers, we've got the trials, we've got the early pipeline discussions, and we can start to plan in terms of timelines with companies, and then we've got the vigilance and CPRD, and that should be the backcloth to trying to, if you like, get better visibility of where we can achieve priorities. No point saying we want a priority on something where we actually haven't got that pull, and we do have that pull, and we can readjust, particularly with our science strategy, to make sure that pull is really adhesive.
Nicola, do you want to comment?
Only to say that when we've been sort of refreshing our thinking on what should be in the science strategy and where we can make most impact, there's a lot of overlap here, and we can be pulling these through, I think, in a greater detail.
I think the question for me is, should it be perfect overlap almost? I mean, to what extent does that science strategy prioritisation need to map to these system priorities? And there would seem to be some things in that science strategy which are not listed here, which I would think we might want to be prioritising. We don't mention dementia here, for example, which I think is something that we would probably all agree we want to be doing whatever we can to support. So I don't know, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just sort of, there's a question for us to think about, about alignment and how much we want to push that forward, I think.
No, indeed.
Does anyone? Yeah.
So I would say, if we start earlier with the product lifecycle structure, we can throw a very wide net on technologies and emerging innovations as opposed to single product focus or single disease focus. So there's something we can do as an agency is, if we've got the right intelligence and the right horizon scanning, understand where technology are emerging from around the world and can gear up and upskill in South Mims to handle that. That wouldn't impact, as far as I'm concerned, on any statutory timelines because it's not about applications. That gives us a very broad level of understanding from basic science through to some applied science. And then the system might well come across those things with individual products being developed. So it's nuanced, but I say we can throw a wider net to begin with than the system can from an R&I perspective, and then that will funnel down into products as they emerge.
Raj, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I think if we're looking at this, there are 3 components here, and they need to come together in some ways. We got the generics, we got the new chemical entities, then we have our own science strategy. They need to come together. So I'm looking at this in the context of the bigger picture. The end-to-end is really important to look at. So that means, as Glenn said, starting early on in development, making sure we look to see what can we do there, because they're sort of interrelated. If you want more NCEs and new technologies or dementia or gene therapies to come into the UK, you need to start at that point, because that's where research and development starts. It's no point looking at registration alone, because they are interlinked. So we might want to step back in this and actually look and see. Look at the NCEs and the generics slightly differently here, Julian, because they are different business needs, I think, if I look at it from an industry perspective. And the shaping of our partner regulators that we work with also will influence hugely the NCEs, as you pointed out. So we need to look at that, but then we need to overlay that a little bit on clinical trials for the NCEs and see how do we make that environment conducive. Because if you pull the threads in at the clinical trial side and make it conducive, then you're already on the trajectory for NCEs to come in, right? So that they will also be planning. The companies would typically be planning quite early to see how would this work. They don't just think of regulatory strategy, they start thinking about it at the stage of clinical trials. So the end-to-end is really important. I see clinical trials incredibly important in that context. And then you then look at registration and see how we can link. The additional aspect that concerns me somewhat as I'm listening to this is the science strategy for us is quite unique in the sense that we also have NIPS. So we have the lab science, which are essays and references, completely quite different, nevertheless science strategy. But then we also have our system science strategy for clinical trials and stuff. And they need to come together, but they may not always come together because they're very different business needs again. So I would highly recommend at this stage, as we are getting experience and insight into some of these procedures and just where we are as an agency, to really start looking and bringing these together and have an integrated discussion. Thank you.
Jim.
No, thank you everybody for your comments, and I think part of putting that in there is to have this conversation and really have this within the board, that we are focusing on this. And I think, as I referenced in 6.3, we need to have this in alignment from the board in terms of what our overall strategy is for both national licensing and our national approach with IRP. And I think that is what we now need to be very clearly working on as well, so that we have this articulated, and it's really looking at using the firm foundations that we now have with the boat process to deliver this. We're iterating it, we're growing it, we're clearing the backlogs from our licensing area. It's now looking in the prospective view of what are we then looking to do and achieve with the national license. So it's having that rounded approach, and that's, for me, the iteration of this. So we are working then within as was in June's report, within the cancer space, looking at the pathways for that, and how do we bring all these different aspects together. So it's a bit of an overview of what do we do within that licensing space.
Paul, comment, and then probably we need to move on.
In fact, it's a separate question, if I may. I mean, it's relating again to productivity on reliance. So in terms of cost, i.e. sort of number of man hours and seniority, how does it compare to a traditional approach? And what would be a reasonable percentage?
So it depends on the basis that you use, so that the input into a IRP application, if it's through route A, is much reduced in terms of the complexity and the seniority of review. If it's through route B, because of the complexities which are in there, it is a higher level of review reflecting the higher cost charged. So that is really clear. The percentages I would need to come back to and just really clearly give you a number answer to that. But we do see a considerable time saving in terms of an IRP for a NAS versus a national for a NAS, probably to the agency, I would probably say at minimum 20% of the cost between the two. So 100, 120% of that, maybe less, but to give that sense of scale. But I would need to be, that's not a reported figure, that I just need to get that number and come back to you.
Okay, any last comments or questions? Thank you for that. I mean, I think clearly it's something that we need to keep revisiting at board and keep an eye on, and some of those internal self-audits would be helpful to see going forward. I think Glenn's in a fortunate position of not being able to take actions from this meeting necessarily. So, but I think there feels like there should be an action around pushing this agenda out, and I think it's for the exec to think how they want to do that, and Nicola's thinking about the science strategy, how we align that quickly with the system so we can actually move some things forward, if not everything. I think would be helpful. All right, thank you everybody. It was good discussion. So let's move on. I think Rachel, you're up next. You're going to talk about the evaluation of patient public involvement strategy. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'd just like to introduce my colleague, Christine Maguire, who's joined us, who is Deputy Director of Patient Involvement. So Christine and her team have very much been leading our work on patient involvement. So I'll ask her to briefly make some introductory comments, just to say that we're just over halfway through the implementation of our first patient involvement strategy, hence doing a sort of midterm evaluation. And I also wanted to thank the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee for the really helpful input we've had as we've designed this evaluation and taken it forward. So Christine, can I hand over to you for any introductory points you want to make?
Thank you, Christine, and welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Just to say, this isn't an impact evaluation. It's just good practice to look at where you've got to around the midpoint to see if there's anything you should change going forward. So the current strategy ends at the end of 2025, and at the end of 2023 into 24, we did a small evaluation or assessment to try and look at key factors we should be focusing on. My team looked across the agency for various examples being carried out by different teams, and we were pleased to see there's a good range of examples coming forward. We also did a small number of semi-structured interviews with both staff and patients familiar with the agency, and some group discussions with the public in general. So I'll just pull out some key points. As I said, we found a good range of examples, but staff do need continued support in terms of training, support in actually conducting some of these exercises, and indeed accessing patient groups. I mean, the system recognises that quality of engagement is really important. If you're going to do this, it has to be done well. And some of the patient respondents mentioned the lack of feedback as being problematic. So you can imagine you've given of your time, of your experience, that could be quite traumatic at times, and then you don't hear anything back. We need to get much better at feeding back, even if nothing happened as a result. We need to show that contributions are valued. To sum up the comment, people were saying, you may be hearing, but that isn't the same as listening and really taking on board. Patients and public welcomed outward comms about the work of the agency in general, and we'll look at putting more focus on that particular element. Those patients who actually engaged with committees and various working groups emphasised the need for support in that environment, because it's not always an environment people are used to. The words, the language, the formality can be quite intimidating. And finally, there was a general feeling among the patients who knew the agency that there was little opportunity for patients to set the agenda. We don't have much more detail on that, but it could be the agenda in terms of a particular therapy, or it could be the broader agenda. So, you know, patients quite often mention supply. That's not necessarily for the MHRA, but clearly it's something that matters to the public. So in the short term, so the rest of this financial year, my team will put more focus on trying to get that feedback and assessing the impact of the public's contributions to MHRA work. Then into 2025, the last year of the strategy, we'll work on further consultation to inform new ambitions from 2026 onwards. So in conclusion, I think what I'd say and what the public was saying, that it's a start, but there's much, much more to do. So yes, I'll finish there. The immediate task is to implement some of these tweaks around our current plan.
Great. It's helpful to hear that. Thank you for that overview. And I mean, clearly some more things that we need to learn to try and help us understand what to do best. But comments or questions? Mercy.
Start.
I thought you might.
So obviously, this came to the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, and we thought it was really important for the board to have a look as well. So that's why it's come to this forum as well. So obviously, we took a bit more of a deep dive into it, not just methodology about how it was done, but obviously the outcomes and things and where we're going in the future for it. I think it was really interesting about feedback and how we get back to people, especially when they're giving up time and expertise to really, as Christine says, sometimes, you know, they might have had quite traumatic experiences and we need to kind of support people. Our big concern was about kind of generally the members of the public. I mean, in some ways it's great that people just presume that the regulator has done its work and that medicines are safe. But in other ways, you know, if they want to know more about us and things, I think there is an issue about the website, and we have been discussing that as well, about where do people get their information about us, how much do they know about us. And this goes for health professionals as well as patients as well. So I'm looking forward to that refresh strategy as well, so that we could be really much more ambitious, but it's good progress. I think we've got some really good examples of where the agency is involving people at an early stage, and really they're making an impact. So that's good. But yes, on to the next stage and being really ambitious as well would be great.
Thanks, Mercy. I mean, that was one of the bits that I was looking for a little bit, was about those examples of understanding actually what the impact had been, rather than the fact that there'd been involvement. And I guess you're probably collecting these, but it would be helpful to have some of these vignettes to really bring home where the value can be added and give people a sense of where they can contribute, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure we've got this right yet.
Yeah.
I think the 2 years I've been here, we've been trying to implement good standards and providing guidelines to staff about how to achieve that. I think a lot of agencies struggle with feedback. I worked in R&D for a long time, and it's the one area that people often fail in, feeding back to the people who participated about what happened. But we've got a plan for this year. And as I said, we'll do further consultation about what are the key priorities out of the various activities we could do.
I mean, it does sound like some routine feedback would be valuable in the long term. I mean, Alison, sorry, Mercy, and then Alison.
Just comment, and your comment, Graham. I think we have talked about case studies, because I think that's what you mean, kind of illustrate, you know, like actually, you know, this really did make a difference in how, you know, medicines were evaluated or, you know, going
just as an example, I think, you know, in the research world, this is obviously a big part of discussion. It's the same questions. And I think there was a thing I saw yesterday where the inclusion criteria of a trial had been changed because a patient had said, look, this doesn't make sense. And I think that's the sort of thing that just helps people understand where they can add value.
Yeah, so examples of that, which we have seen actually, but actually to publicise that more would be great.
Sorry, June, and Alison is waiting. Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up one point about the yellow card scheme.
I was hoping you might.
So we've been doing a lot of work. We've heard this a number of times, and we are doing a lot of work and have already launched quite a number of things. So with the yellow card account, so the landing page where people come in, we've done things like an integrated search bar, so you can type in your healthcare product. This is all on ease of reporting. Reporters are encouraged to create an account, because then they can see the history of their reports, they're able to edit reports, and also we now have a new follow-up notification in alerts, so that if we need follow-up, that gets an alert. And also they can create a watch list of list of products that interest them. We are doing more work on resources and campaigns and videos and headlines on the Yellow Card site, but more specifically in understanding what happens to your report, we're working on our report acknowledgement page. So another of the things we've already done is a registration of your account so you can quickly access reports you've already submitted, a quick link to inform around updates on the product you've just reported on, as well as, again, as I mentioned, adding product to your watch list. But what's coming soon is on that acknowledgement page, there will be a video to really explain what happens to a report. So the journey of a yellow card report once you've submitted it, so that reporters can understand the process that a report goes through, as well as facilities, for example, to update your report much easier and also to name it. And then ultimately, you will also be able to see the types of side effects being reported for the product you've just reported on. So I think that all sort of helps to feed back and understand that what happens to report. We are looking to see if we could have more bespoke acknowledgements, but that obviously will take a little bit of time and it will depend on on individual case reports. The only other thing I would note is that we're doing more public assessment reports when it's a major benefit risk assessment has been done. So, for example, the paternal risk announcement we just did for sodium valproate, we had a public assessment report that was released alongside the announcement, and that has a plain English summary at the beginning, so just to aid understanding.
That's really helpful. The Wi-Fi is not allowing me to look at my app to see whether that's all enacted. So, but it sounds great. I think that really a great avenue to feedback to patients through Yellow Card. Mandy, and then Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an incredibly difficult area, this, in terms of to get right. I think we've got some really good ideas about those examples and feedback, and I think that can help a lot. The other thing I was trying to understand where we were up to was with most patients are engaging probably with their healthcare professional who's prescribed the medicine, is that how are we joining forces with healthcare professionals to get these messages back? Because I think what Alison's summarised is really, really positive, but probably patients are interacting with healthcare professionals on a more day-to-day basis and how we can work with them. I was thinking about like Martha's Law and the implications there. How have we taken that learning, and what are we doing to work more closely with healthcare professionals on this?
I guess this might come back to you, Alison, and maybe relates to some of our earlier conversation, but
certainly through the Yellow Card scheme, we have user groups that we work with to understand about what features that they would like to see on the Yellow Cards, on the Yellow Card site. But more broadly than that, in terms of benefit risk assessments, we are working more and more with patients and really trying to bring patients in earlier in a benefit risk assessment, so to understand that lived experience before an assessor then looks at the data and forms an opinion. So to really understand at an early stage around patient engagement, around the patient lived experience. So we're trying to do at least 50% of our reviews to incorporate that patient lived experience. So I think it is increasing and evolving, and we're learning through that process as well of what works well and what doesn't work so well. So very much take on board the feedback aspect, and we have tried to do that, and especially with the valproate announcement, we did go back to our valproate stakeholder network and provide information on what we were doing, and we will work with them on the materials as we go forward as well.
Great, thank you. Is that okay, Mandy? Michael, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I support the paper, a very good piece of work, and I'm sure we're covering this, but nowhere in here do we, and it is in the patient engagement strategy, isn't it, about inclusivity, and the extent to which are we really capturing the views of people who may not, from different race, different ethnicity. I recall, it was the most powerful thing of that conference that you successfully held a couple of years ago. The lady who was representing Afro-Caribbean maternity said, "You say I'm hard to reach. I don't think I'm hard to reach." Are we assured, Mercy, from your committee, that the engagement strategy is making enough progress in inclusivity?
We have some examples like sickle cell. So, you know, there are particular examples. Diversity overall, I'm sure Christine will agree we've got a way to go for some of this, haven't we?
Yeah, Christine, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it is one of the issues where most arm's length bodies across the health system struggle. And it's partly to do with purpose of the exercise at the time, speed with which it's happening, and whose agenda it is. Added to that, there are groups, we say underserved because it's not hard to reach, it's that they are being underserved. We've looked across the system. Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health actually does outreach in the community, as in the staff are in communities to get that feedback, but it's hugely resource intensive. We tend to tailor our activities around that, the question we're being asked. But this is getting into the area of sociology of medicine and lay epidemiology and whether people understand there is an issue. So it's a really complex area, certainly needs more attention.
Do we have data to track? I mean, do you have a sense from what you're doing as to how representative it is at the moment? Is that something?
I would say it's not representative.
Okay.
I don't have data.
So I mean, you've talked at the end about refreshing the strategy and looking forward, and maybe the steer here is that that could be a greater focus for you, and you know, having some data that would help understand where it's working, where it's not working would be quite important. I think where there's a specific disease like sickle cell disease, it's obviously easier to identify different groups, but elsewhere it may be harder, I guess.
I mean, one thing we're going to do is refresh our patient group consultative forum because it's been a set group of patient agencies, and we're going to widen membership to try and draw in some of the agencies that represent particular groups to bring them into that sphere. But I'd add there are some peculiarities in the system. So we've been developing a payment policy for patients, and certainly where people are on benefits, there's a limit to what you can pay, otherwise it affects the benefits. So the whole health system is struggling with some really puzzling things.
Yeah, I mean, that's a recurrent problem in other settings, which feels fixable, to be honest. I think there must be ways around that. Sorry, we need to move on, but briefly, Raj, and then Julian, and we'll move on.
I think, Michael, your question was actually discussed at the last face-to-face committee, actually, because at the committee level, we see this as a gap as well in that context. There are probably 1,000 reasons why this won't work. I think that's just the reality. But the important thing is, what can we do? And because this is also faced by other arm's length bodies and others, maybe we should, then they're making progress. So maybe we need to also reach out and find out how they're doing. The other thing, last thing I want to say is underserved and underrepresented are very different things. And I think we need to look at that in a very different way. But I would highly recommend its timing is good now. We've kind of hit the first, to come up with a very tangible approach on what we can do, because there are other things, there are many roads to Rome, Christine, so we can look to see what can we do. And it will be a slow progress, for sure, but it won't happen dynamically. It has to happen by design. So I think that's why it's good to have a very tangible ideas to be brought through for us to discuss. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's more to phrase that we are looking at that very clearly in the licensing area. How do we bring these things in terms of that patient review? Because some of those things are confidential, some of those things have other aspects to them. So it's looking to get as much of a broad review into that process as much as we can do. And we're taking that through with things like activities on the dementia, so that had patient engagement, and it's really looking at building these things going forward. Okay. Just wanted that.
Yeah, that's helpful.
There are tangible parts to how do we bring this into it as well.
Yeah, thanks. Rachel? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I have no doubt that everybody is committed to this, I really do. But, you know, I'm sure we all have heard it's also difficult, and can never be an excuse. It needs concerted leadership, and think about what the ultimate goal is. It's about public trust. That if you come from everybody in society, they need to be in a position that they trust the MHRA in terms of its judgment. If they're not engaged, they will never trust us. And that's not to say that we're not doing our best, but I do really encourage concerted leadership in this space.
Thank you.
Just to assure you, we looked at, as you'll know with my report, we looked at women's health, and we are looking at the Whitehead report as well, which really brings it into our space, very much so. So, yeah, little by little, but yeah, we need to keep pushing that too. And also the work NHS England is doing, for instance, on health inequalities, which we've looked at as a board, is really important too. So that's that joined up whole system approach.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. I think the feedback's been really helpful. I mean, we've spent a lot of time trying to get the basics right here and to get the system we have to a point internally where we can then use it for the springboard for the next strategy. So very happy that we can pick up all the points that have been mentioned. The other thing I just wanted to briefly bring out was the work that we've been doing to strengthen relationships both across the system but also with the professional bodies, because reaching healthcare professionals, we need to be approaching from many areas. Some is direct, and we're just about to publish our safety communications strategy today, in fact, which came to the board a little while ago. But also it's about those direct relationships, but also the ones via professional bodies, so that we can build them at different levels. Partnership working is very much at the heart of this, because, as Christine said, it is not easy. And we need to work across the system and with colleagues to get to the next level in the new strategy.
Thank you. Paul?
It's just building, Michael, on your point about trust. To me, that's the absolutely key thing. So do all of our stakeholders trust the MHRA, what it says? So I sort of wanted to know, a patient who is not represented by anybody, who lives in a nowhere land, do they trust that the medicine that they are taking is safe? And do they trust what is written on the box? And that also applies to clinicians. And I just don't have a sense for that at the moment.
I mean, I guess that's a broader question than this paper about it. Do you want to comment, Christine, and then maybe Rachel?
I'd probably agree with you. When I first took on this role, I sort of phoned around various academics, and there seemed to be a good literature on risk perception in public health, so air pollution, tobacco. But the key academics in this area agreed there was very little literature on risk perception of medicines and devices. And there's probably a reason for that, and that we're taught we should trust. So people don't automatically question. So I think I too don't really have a sense of how people perceive medicines and devices as a population.
Rachel, do you want to comment in terms of public perceptions and trust and confidence?
Yeah, certainly we do some very limited tracking in terms of public perceptions. Clearly, looking at how perceptions change over time is really important. I don't think we've seen any dramatic shifts in the sort of levels of confidence that the public have in medicines and medical devices. It has changed a bit, but not hugely. But we could certainly look at whether there is further work to do in this area that we could take forward, perhaps as part of the updating of the strategy.
Okay. June, I think, sorry, Paul.
Well, this has been a really important discussion, actually, and I think, as Rachel has just said, we should take the strategy away and use this as a catalyst to challenge ourselves a lot more rather than say how difficult it all is. I think we need to be systematic about this, and there's no reason why we shouldn't give feedback, and particularly to those patients whose points haven't been taken on board, the reasons for that. That's common courtesy, if you like. But we are part of the core 20+5, so we're keeping pace with the work in the NHS. And the Director of Inequalities came and spoke to us all, as you know. I think it's time to do a stock take in that frame to see how well we're doing against their sequence of actions, particularly in the data that are used, and I turn to the opportunity that we have with the clinical trials legislation. We may not get representativeness on the face of the legislation, but we are absolutely determined to make the guidance on how to achieve representativeness in the populations who will use the medicine from the very start of a clinical trial. So let's take that as a catalyst, a test point, but look right across the piece. So I'm very glad to have this back on the ExCo executive agenda so that we can challenge ourselves fully. It's been a really helpful discussion. Thank you.
Great, and thank you for the paper again. I mean, I think that clearly this is on a journey, and I think there's clear signs of progress, and I guess that you've had a lot of feedback here, but there's a encouragement to be bold in going forward and taking the next steps to really embed this further. Thank you. Right, thank you. We'll let that run a bit because I thought it was probably needed more time than we allocated. So next is an update on health and safety. Nicola, do you want to just comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to remind that the health and safety team delivers the health and safety across all of the agencies, so all aspects, and that's across the offices, the laboratory facility, working away from the normal places of work in the UK and abroad. And that's always covered in an annual report. So what this paper is an update. It's quite a focused one. It's looking at our health and safety provision, particularly to support our laboratory facility currently, and with a focus on responding to the health and safety executive actions following visits to our site. So the current position is laid out for you to read. This is focused here on our work to address the actions around our improvement notice, for which we have a date to respond towards the end of the year. The strengthening of our health and safety team with the addition of a biorisk safety advisor. That's under recruitment. Engaging the expert external advice to support us in the activities that we want to take on, and to look at how we might provision our health and safety team for the future. We've also put in place a health and safety subgroup of the MHRA's executive committee. That's in place, and that's helping us focus and streamline our reporting in particular, but also looking at managing our action plans against the above that I've just mentioned. I've also noted that we're enhancing some of our trainings. That's really reinforcing the sort of training that we already deliver for our staff, but taking additional external support here so we can enhance that across our key areas. And then the last point there is noting that with our capital investment for our site, we make sure that we look at the health and safety aspects of that so that we can monitor those and make sure that those are implemented in an appropriate way. So I'll pause there. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Comments or questions? I normally look at Mandy at this point, but...
Okay, thanks, Nicola. There looks to be good progress. What timescales and are we on to do those actions? And what areas of concern do you have about achieving the objectives, particularly against the HSE improvement notice?
Yes, thank you, Maddie. So with our action plan for the improvement notice, we are on track for that. So we have a detailed local action plan, and we've been monitoring that throughout. We have a date in December that we have to respond to, the HSE. We're working towards just ahead of that to make sure that we have all of our evidence in place for that. We've also had a recent discussion with the HSE to make sure that they are comfortable with the approach that we're taking. So I think we have confidence on that. In terms of the support through the team, I think that's something that we are looking at critically. We are adding an additional post, and with that biosafety focus, that's really tapping into sort of the experience that we probably need more of on our site. We have a lot of engagement from embedded staff with health and safety responsibilities, such as our biological safety officers, but we feel that this will give us greater oversight from that core professional team.
So just microphone, Manny.
When will they be appointed?
So the advert is going live. So
Okay.
we anticipate obviously a period of the advert and then obviously recruitment. It may well be ahead of Christmas, but I would anticipate certainly the new year.
Okay, that's good. And I suppose another question, what's been the key learning for the organisation from this activity that can be spread throughout the organisation?
Again, a really good point. I think from our point of view, it's making sure that we have a system that we feel is appropriate for what we need to do, is embedded and is monitored. And I think we're strengthening on that. And we want to put something in place that is there for the long term and make sure that we can not only embed it but implement it effectively. And that's really what we're working towards.
That's good. And I think the board is here and the ExCo to make sure you can achieve that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Nicola, as ever, thank you, clear in the paper. Can I just check on this biosafety officer? I remember we had a discussion at ARAC last December. I don't think you were there, so I'm not holding. But I think there was reference to this post then, and I'm just a bit concerned. We're now in September. It seems to have taken quite a long time to get. I just wondered, is that, I may have got my facts wrong, but I just wanted to be clear on that.
No, and I'd like to reassure you that we haven't been without biosafety advice. So we do have biosafety officers who are our members of staff embedded in our staff already, who are trained.
Okay.
I've been in that position myself
Right.
previously.
Thank you.
We have formal training, which does support our site. This post here is adding a new post to our core professional team that will support those staff who are embedded. You're not wrong to say that we have discussed this previously. I think we have now, though, focused in on what we want in that post, how we want to embed that in the system, and how hopefully they will support our staff as well as the rest of the team.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I've got one other question. So we've been dealing with this issue, again, not a criticism, for some time, and I understand the complexity. What impact has that had on the functionality of South MIMS? Have there been a number of labs that couldn't be used, and how have we managed that?
So what we did when, in response to an HSC, Health and Safety Executive, coming in, we elected to pause activities at a certain biohazard so that we could take the time to review what we wanted to implement. Both, it gave us a chance to think more clearly about some of the processes we felt should be embedded towards our improvement notice as well. So we focused at the time to make sure that we had a criticality of the ones that we wanted to focus on first, and we've gone through that list, and so we've managed our work processes and our work outputs accordingly.
So have some of our labs, you've done exactly the right thing. What I'm trying to get at is this has had consequences for our ability to do a certain amount of work, which we haven't been able to do for legitimate reasons. What is the scale of that we haven't been able to do?
So going back to my point about our priorities, we made sure that our priorities for example, the dispatch of our biological standards, which are used globally, was not impacted. So we made sure that we focused on that one first, that we were serving our customers so that manufacturers and other stakeholders had access to those. With our higher containment facilities and the activities therein, it's a balance between the work that we need to do with these higher hazard pathogens and lower hazard pathogens. We've been able to manage our work programs so that we can focus perhaps on some of the lower hazard work in the meantime. But we had a lot of engagement with staff. We made sure that we were looking at the deliverables for their work, any commitments that we had for grants and contracts, and any key public health outputs, so that we could balance our review of those activities before we brought them back
That's
live.
fair. And I'll conclude this. My question really what I'm getting at, and I'll be more blunt on this, have we been able to still to deliver our core activities with less capacity?
It's not the less, you mean the lower capacity in our laboratories. We've delivered our activities we have refocused them so that we are working on our lower hazard groups in that meantime. What we're able to do, though, is now build those back up, and we can take on the higher hazard work again now. Sorry, Michael.
No,
yes,
thank you for your perseverance.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
But there is a question about what is core, and I think
Yeah,
we haven't quite got to the core of the question. But yeah, sorry.
Yes, and the core work is a balance of.
Yeah.
I think there might be this perception that if we're doing work at high hazard, so CL3, containment level 3, that is somebody's sole purpose. It's a real balance. Okay. So we have some activities we have to do in those containment laboratories. I'd like to think that the core activities have been delivered successfully, and it really has been down to the staff working very closely with us to make sure that we got those priorities and the timelines nailed for when we were bringing those labs back up.
Maybe just to finish that point from Michael is in terms of current capacity and activity, what I don't know if you can say with a number, but what proportion is still not active or is online to come back on?
We're almost 100% again now, and the only one that remains is one where it's actually working on a different audit. So the timelines for that were inevitably going to be a bit further out, but everything else is back online. So thank you for your support in that as well.
Thank you. That's very clear. Michael, happy?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? If not, thank you, Nicola. I think we'll move on. That's great. I think that moves us to the summary papers from our committees. I think Michael, or Mandy, sorry, you're up first with ODRC.
Okay, thanks, Graham. So
I should correct myself about acronyms, but you can.
ODRC is quite a mouthful, so it's the Organisation, Development and Remuneration Committee. So when we met in August, we focused on some of the activities around return to green, so how is the organisation supporting the objectives, and there was a very short item on the executive remuneration, which we also assessed at that meeting. So the headlines, again, from the meeting, we reviewed the progress of return to green and the timelines for elimination of backlogs. I think we're encouraging how the organisation is balancing its people, process and technology. And we are seeing there was a very good root cause analysis being done by the project team on where they think the root causes of some of the issues that we've encountered are. And I think the committee was encouraged that we are looking into those root causes as well as addressing, as we've heard from Julian, how we're eliminating the backlogs. And so that was good. We also welcomed the much closer integration of the Return to Green programme and the Route to Moderate. And that is really important because it's getting into how we're operating across the organisation and collaborating, which is perhaps one of the areas we've had to readjust to, particularly after the transformation. We reviewed the elimination of backlogs. I'm not going to go into that in detail because we've looked at that, but we also were looking forward into other potential areas in terms of how inspections, scientific advice, and how the planning to address the performance is being operated in those areas. Perhaps the area of perhaps most concern was regulatory connect. Release 1 was delivered in March, and I think we're continuing to support the improvements in performance across that. We were informed that Release 2, which was designed to deliver improvements in internal case management, product licensing, clinical trials and inspections, would not now achieve its delivery, which was planned at the end of November 24, within its original budget. That's obviously an area of considerable concern, and I think there's work still to be done to replan that programme. But I think it's probably worth highlighting that programme has been on the blocks for a considerable amount of time. A lot of work has been done to understand the the processes that we need to design, and then the integration back with the digital team to make those processes into systems. I think I'm fair to say I'm not totally clear where our redesigned programme is and what we're going to deliver by the end of November. So that's obviously, that is quite concerning. There is work ongoing to focus that on product licensing for the next 3 months, which is when the budget will run out. But I think that's perhaps something we need to review at board level going forward to see how that's going to support the agency going forward. So that was probably quite a big headline piece. I think we're seeing good progress in bringing together of understanding where the people and the recruitment programme comes together, and we're seeing increased capability, particularly in some of our key areas of licensing and clinical trials, and that's being supported by the Return to Green programme. But it was interesting the highlights of root causes to try and get to address some of the issues we've seen. Obvious ones were resources and technology, but also communication, culture, understanding the processes. And I think we saw progress in many of those areas, but still more work to do. So good work in progress. We're seeing the results that we're seeing with that, but probably the biggest concern is our Regulatory Connect programme going forward.
Well, thank you. So, and thank you to the work of the committee. It seems like there's a lot going on through ODRC, so thanks. Michael, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm really assured by what you say, Mandy, about Return to Green. That's really good. I do think Regulatory Connect should come back to the board in a board seminar, and I would recommend that's in October. I would remind the board that we took a business case, a revised business case last October, which substantially changed the budget and a whole range of things, and this is a governance issue, really, that we need to look at in more detail. So thank you.
And we can check where it's on the board agenda, but it sounds like it's a push to do it as soon as possible. Yeah, so we can talk about
Can
that.
I just jump in? I think SRO Mick Foy will be here this afternoon. I'm sure if we give him a heads up now, he'll be ready to at least give a high-level orientation on the reprogramming.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments on Regulatory Connect? Anything else people want to pick up? Okay. Well, look, thank you again to the committee for all the hard work. It's visible. Mercy, I think we'll move to you and the reports of Patient Safety Engagement Committee.
Yes, certainly. So the committee met on the 5th of September, so only less than a couple of weeks ago. We had 4 substantive items that we were discussing. I should also say that I announced that we have appointed a new lay member of the committee as well. She was unable to join us at this meeting, but will be at the next one, and that will bring us up to full strength on our lay representation. But just the 4 areas were looking at antidepressants, and really about patient information leaflets and how do we highlight particular issues with antidepressants, which are there are over 30 different active ingredients within the antidepressants in the UK that are on the market, and there are 105 marketing authorisation holders, so really kind of a complex picture. But there have been warnings about suicidal behaviours and sexual dysfunction on some of them. So it was really about how patient information leaflets work on highlighting issues and what can be done about that. But it was how do we really engage people and stakeholders to convey the kind of these issues to patients when we know actually lots of people do not read the patient information leaflets. So this triggered, I think, a debate about the bigger use of patient information leaflets. as well. So I have to say that the important thing as well about how we get information to patients was also kind of engaging with particular patient groups that can help us with this. For instance, Samaritans and Young Minds as well, when it comes to things like suicidal behaviour. So that was an interesting discussion, and I know people might want to comment on that. I'll go on to the Women's Health report. Now, this was a piece of work that the organisation has done across the agency, looking at how we look at women's health in terms of medicines. And it was a really important piece of work. And I think the conclusions were that we supported the idea of a roadmap that looks across the whole life cycle of products, from clinical trials all the way through to pharmacovigilance as well. There was a lot of work to do around women's health, and I think we had a really, really good discussion, which I think might be a template for other diversity issues as well. So that was important. And then I go on to Pyramate, which is a treatment for epilepsy. Now, there has been some report that it might also lead to ADHD and other autism spectrum disorder, as well as the known side effects of topiramate. And it was really about how do we get a look at a wide range of stakeholder engagement to really look at how we find out and protect patient safety. And again, that was a really good discussion about the kind of the monitoring that we can do to protect patients. And lastly, clozapine use in schizophrenia and Parkinson's disease. It's potentially life-threatening. We've had some real concerns from patients, but it's that public concern and getting broader stakeholder engagement that was really needed for this really important kind of drug, but with some really key and mixed feedback we were getting. I'd also like to note to my fellow Ned, Paul Goldsmith, that we actually said that the group should get back to you as well, because you'll have some real insight to support this work too. So that was just the kind of the overview to a really important discussion on some really key areas that actually all sit with Alison Cave. So she had a very busy committee, I have to say, but I think we had some really good discussions, and that we could pull out, although we were talking about some specific medicines here, I think we could pull out learning across the piece, really, for a lot of the things that we did. I don't know if my fellow committee members want to add to that, but that's just my summary of it.
No, thank you. That's a very good summary. And I think, as you say, there were some quite challenging conversations about how to do things in the best way for public health, I think. Alison, as you say, there's a lot of work that's been on your shoulders. Anything you want to let's highlight or come back on?
No, not really, except that it picks up on some of the conversations we've had earlier. And I think in this particular, with many of these issues, getting that diversity of views from patients will be incredibly important. And many of these issues have particular patient needs, and it will be really important to think about that as we go through these engagement processes. But the charities will be really important in reaching out to their population of patients and in order to help us reach the more diverse spectrum of patients. So yeah, we're really just picking up on that conversation and really looking at really a holistic view of multiple different ways to communicate and engage with patients, to understand how they accept or how they understand how they understand the information that we're trying to provide to them on the risks of the products that they're taking.
Yeah, Raj.
No questions per se, but really just wanted to take the opportunity to commend Alison and her team on having done an outstanding job on the papers, because these were very complex areas that enabled the committee then to be able to come up with some suggestions and ideas in there. And also, so really, I mean, it's the complexity was a lot more than we had anticipated when we went into the discussion. So it was really good, Alison. So thanks to you and your team for that.
And Paul, I don't know if you want to comment on topiramate. I mean, clearly there are differences and similarities to the discussions around valproate, but any insight to share?
I think it's us understanding the sort of the whole sort of system effect of any change. I mean, because it's not just topiramate, there are multiple drugs that also have other issues. I mean, acetazolamide being one that is used a lot increasingly for intracranial hypertension. So it's just sort of making sure that when we make a change, we're not just sort of shifting the problem onto another area, and it's understanding the counterfactual.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? I mean, Mercy, going forward, are there areas that the committee will be looking at, do you think, that it's worth highlighting here that you'll want feedback and input for?
Certainly there's going to be discussions with certain chief officers, including Julian, to add to our agenda. So it's really about our forward plan to make sure that we're operating across the whole of the agency as well. Obviously, our last committee was particularly looking at Alison's agenda on patient safety, but actually the committee can comment across the whole piece, and I think it's really important that we get a good balance of issues that come to the committee so we can give it scrutiny, and hopefully some early discussions will help the future development of you know, how we take some of these things forward. I mean, it's always great to get the outputs of surveys and reviews, but if we could have some input right at the beginning, it's also very helpful, I think, for the organisation.
Yeah, and I think mindful of our earlier conversations about using that committee maybe as a way of shaping some of the thinking that's going on for future strategy. Okay, great. Well, thank you. That was very clear. I think that brings us to the end of our papers, and I think that then leads us to questions from the public. I think we have some submitted, and Rachel, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So we've got a couple of pre-submitted questions, and we've also got some that have been shared during the meeting. So I'll start with the pre-submitted ones, and the first one is one that I believe Julian's going to pick up. So the person submitting the question said, the MHRA is seeking to become a world-class regulator. How does it propose to achieve this when it has resource issues and is underfunded?
There you go. Small one for you, Julian.
Yeah, apologies, I'm just not quick enough opening up my response. The main thrust of where we are looking, obviously, is to make sure that we have innovation, and we're looking at making sure that we have the resources, the capabilities, the processing of systems to enable this to be achieved. We have been resource constrained in terms of some of our capability, and really looking at to make sure that those systems, as we've alluded to, in terms of linking within the various parts of the ecosystem, right the way from Nicola's area in SR and SNR, through clinical trials, through into the licensing area, and then into the post-marketing area. It's underpinned by delivery of technology. So the regulatory connect, as we've been talking about, is fundamental to enabling that to happen, building on Safety Connect and the other work that we've done in that area. We are looking to make sure that with the work in forecasting, that we know what our demands are in the longer term, and we have that better horizon scanning for both technology, the particular disease areas, and the volumes of work coming to the agency, so that we can then appropriately look at that. We have had additional funding, which has been utilised to embed some elements of innovation and in devices and in the medicines area. So things around how we support the AI airlock, how we support other innovative aspects, that has been an ongoing theme and will continue to be. But it's really to make sure that we are right-sized, we have the right funding, and to then make sure that we deliver that with the volumes and activities that we need to have coming forward.
Okay, I don't know if anyone else wants to comment. Otherwise, thank you. And I think, is that the next question online? Is that right? Or
Yes, that's right. If we could, the next questioner has said they would like to ask their question in person, so if they could be brought into the meeting.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
we can. Well,
My name is Fatima. I'm a second year PhD student at King's working on patient engagement. So I'd please like to know about the impact of patient and public involvement in regulatory decisions, and whether you have any examples of how it has helped in making regulatory decisions.
Thank you for the question. I think hopefully you heard some of our discussion earlier, but Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to pick that one up, at least initially. And as you said, we have covered some of this in the earlier discussion. So in our corporate plan, colleagues will remember that we did commit to increasing patient involvement patient input into the decision making on scientific assessments, so that we could make sure that input was provided before decisions were made. So we've been piloting this on a couple of areas. And the feedback certainly from our internal teams that it's been incredibly helpful to get that day-to-day lived experience from those patients who have provided input. And just in terms of a couple of examples, we had patient involvement in the considerations relating to a gene therapy for sickle cell. Another example, which is currently ongoing, is involving patient views in a review of a treatment for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which again is taking place at the moment. And then in a slightly different way, we have 5 cancer patient experts and some representatives from rare disease patient groups on the highly personalised medicines expert working group, which is meeting at the moment and looking at our approach to regulation in this new area. So that's just a few examples, very much by way of piloting, but it's something where we're getting very good feedback and want to extend further.
Thanks. I hope that addresses your question.
Yes, thank you. And in terms of challenges, what has been the challenges involving patients and public?
Do you want to start with that, Rachel? Maybe others want to.
Yeah, I'll start, and then other colleagues may want to join in. I think one of the challenges is making sure that we have a range of views that can contribute, and that we make sure they come from diverse groups. It slightly picks up on the conversation from the earlier strategy, but certainly I think it's making sure that we have the right input at the right time from a range of views, so that when we are looking at the assessment side, our colleagues can take that range of views into account in reaching their decision. I'm looking at Julian because as you look like you may want to comment.
No, I was going to say I totally agree with you. And it is trying to find the right balance of opinion so that we get the broad breadth of different engagement. For some of the recent decisions which have been quite challenging, that has helped in terms of having the discussion to really pull together the discussions that have been going.
Yeah. Fatima, I mean, if I may be so bold, is your PhD on patient engagement?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, look, can I encourage? Well, we've got your contact details, I hope. I think I would encourage you to engage with the agency, and hopefully we can help you, and you might be able to help us.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll certainly be in touch to follow that up. So moving on to some questions that have come in through the meeting. There's a couple on the yellow card scheme. So if I do the two together, and then Alison, I'm sure, will answer them. So the first one was whether the yellow card scheme should be used for medical devices as well as for medicines. And the second question was whether you could work with other GP IT system providers, such as the Vision system, which is used in Scotland, and also with community pharmacy systems.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. So the first point is that the yellow card scheme is already collects and has done for a number of years, since 2015, has collected information directly from devices. Just to be clear, it collects across a wide spectrum of healthcare products, including, well, accepts reports, medicines, vaccines, medical devices, herbal products, blood, factor and immunoglobulin products, falsified and fake products, e-cigarettes and defective products. So we accept reports on a wide range of items. With regards to other GP systems, we already engage with Vision, and also we are working with, we accept reports, of course, from pharmacists, and that includes community pharmacists. In fact, very recently, we've listened to some feedback from the stakeholders about our reporting categories, and have now changed the way we represent reporters on our system, so that we have two-tier selection list, and then and that now includes a new category of medical device specialists, including engineers. So we now have some new categories, and in the pharmacy category, obviously community pharmacists are included in that. In terms of integrating with the community pharmacist sort of systems, many of them already have reporting links to the Yellow Card website information from their systems, but they don't have quite the full integration that I was talking about earlier with the EMIS systems. But we continue to work with them. Many of them already have educational resources and signpost to the Yellow Card systems, and we're often run campaigns with National Pharmacy Association to distribute materials and to promote the Yellow Card scheme. So we are working very closely with that, obviously very important professional body. Thank you.
Great, that's a very helpful answer. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alison. The next one is on the paper on international recognition. And the question is whether any international recognition applications for new active substances or established medicines have been rejected for marketing authorisations. Yeah, so whether any IRP applications for new active substances or established medicines have been rejected for marketing authorisations.
IRP applications, I don't believe at this point any have been refused. For established medicines, definitely yes. We have refused medicines licensing applications.
Anything you can say in general terms about those, or?
Generally, for the comments we've previously had in terms of lack of information, we have looked at timing as well. So where we haven't received responses, or where additional information is taking too long to pull together for the application within statutory timelines, they have been also refused within the established medicines profile or project for that as well.
Okay, well, I hope that the questioner might be able to get some more information from the discussion earlier in the paper, if that's available.
Just, I suppose, one final point to that. We are, and we will cover more detail on that topic specifically, not on the IRP, but on the established medicines on the 17th of October.
Your webinar. We'll all be there. Good. One more?
Okay, and there's one final question which relates back to the CEO report, where the questioner is asking whether all inspections are now done virtually and whether any inspections are done in person.
Is that June or Alison or?
Yes, I think Julian can probably help there, but absolutely some are done in person. Really important that that point lands.
Yeah. Inspections are done in face-to-face. So there are some inspections which are done in a virtual manner, but the majority are face-to-face inspections, both within the UK and globally, making sure that we have that understanding of direct interaction and visibility within companies.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that concludes this morning's questions that were submitted.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think that concludes the business of the meeting. And I'm very grateful to all those who've attended. Thank you for your time and your questions. And we look forward to the next Board in Public, which will be in 2 months' time. And the recording of this will be available on the website. So thank you very much.